You may remember the sound of footsteps in another room. Not hurried footsteps, not the kind that suggested someone was coming to find you, to check on you, to see how your day had been. Just footsteps. The soft thud of slippers on carpet, the heavier fall of shoes on hardwood, moving from kitchen to bedroom, bedroom to bathroom, tracing the same predictable paths day after day. You learned to read those footsteps the way other children learn to read facial expressions. You could tell from the rhythm whether your father was in a good mood or whether he was tired and wanted to be left alone. You could hear in your mother's pace whether she was distracted, whether this was a good time to ask for help with homework or whether you should retreat to your room and figure it out yourself. Doors opening and closing. Always closing. The gentle click of a bedroom door shutting at 8 in the evening, your parent disappearing behind it for the rest of the night. The bathroom door locked for long stretches, not because anything was wrong, but because privacy was the most important thing, more important than a child who might need something, who might be scared, who might simply want to talk. The sound of the garage door rumbling open in the morning and shut again in the evening, marking the boundaries of presence without connection. These sounds became the soundtrack of your childhood, a constant reminder that you shared a home with people who were perpetually elsewhere, even when they were standing right next to you. The hum of a television, always on, always filling the silence that might otherwise demand conversation. You learned that the television was a third presence in your home, sometimes the most animated presence, the one that commanded attention and received it. Your parents would settle into their usual spots, the recliner, the corner of the couch, and their eyes would fix on the screen with a focus they rarely directed at you. You could walk into the room and say something, and they might nod without looking away, might murmur a response that suggested they heard the sound of your voice but not the content of your words. The television was a buffer, a convenient excuse for disconnection that looked like normalcy. After all, every family watches television together. How could anyone call that neglect? The clatter of dishes being washed, your mother's hands busy with practical tasks, always busy, always moving, always occupied with the maintenance of the household but never quite available for the maintenance of your heart. You might hover in the doorway of the kitchen, wanting to tell her about something that happened at school, something that felt important or confusing or exciting. She would continue washing, rinsing, drying, her movements efficient and automatic, and she might say at intervals that suggested listening but felt more like tolerance. Eventually, you learned to stop hovering. You learned that her hands were always full, that there was always one more task to complete. And that your inner world, your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, would have to wait. Except waiting became permanent. The right moment never quite arrived. Your parents were there, physically occupying the same space as you, moving through their routines with mechanical precision. In the mornings, your father would sit at the kitchen table with his coffee and newspaper, barely glancing up when you came down for breakfast. Your mother would pack lunches and sign permission slips and make sure you had everything you needed for school, all while maintaining a certain distance, as if childcare were a series of logistical tasks rather than an opportunity for connection. Dinner happened at the same time each evening. The 3 or 4 or 5 of you gathered around a table, forks and knives scraping against plates, the silence occasionally broken by a question about whether you had homework or a comment about the weather. These rituals of family life were all present, all technically correct, yet something essential was missing from them, some animating force that turned routine into relationship. Yet somehow, you felt utterly alone. This loneliness wasn't dramatic or obvious. It didn't announce itself with the slam of a door or the raised voice of an argument. It was quiet, persistent, woven into the ordinary fabric of your days. You felt it in the morning when you came downstairs already dressed and fed yourself breakfast because no one had offered. You felt it after school when you let yourself into an empty house with your own key, knowing your parents wouldn't be home for hours, and even when they arrived they wouldn't ask about your day in any meaningful way. You felt it at night when you lay in bed and could hear them in the living room, so close and yet impossibly far. And you knew that if you got up and went to them with a bad dream or a worry, you'd be met with a sigh, a tired, go back to bed, a sense that you were an interruption rather than a person they were glad to see. This wasn't the absence that comes from a parent who travels for work or struggles with illness. If your father had been away on business trips, you could have understood the distance. If your mother had been hospitalized or dealing with a serious health condition, the lack of emotional availability would have made sense, would have had a name and a reason. Children can understand absence when it has an explanation. But this was different. Your parents were right there. They sat across from you at dinner. They drove you to school and picked you up from activities. They attended parent-teacher conferences and signed report cards. To the outside world, and perhaps even to yourself, it looked like you had a normal childhood. And that made your loneliness even more confusing, even harder to name or understand. This was something more confusing, more painful. Because how do you explain to someone that you feel abandoned by people who never left? How do you articulate that you're lonely in a house full of people? When you're young, you don't have the vocabulary for emotional neglect. You don't understand that a parent can provide all the material necessities of life, food, shelter, clothing, education, and still leave a child starving for something essential. You just know that something feels wrong, that there's a hollowness inside you that you can't explain, that when you see other children with their parents, there's something happening between them that doesn't happen in your house. You notice the way a friend's mother touches her daughter's hair absently while they talk, the way she leans in and listens like the words matter. You notice the way another child's father ruffles his son's hair and asks him real questions, questions that dig beneath the surface of how was school, and actually want to know who the child is becoming. They were right there, within reach, and yet unreachable. You could walk across a room and stand next to your mother and feel 1,000 miles away from her. You could sit beside your father on the couch and sense an invisible wall between you, something that kept you separate no matter how physically close you were. This proximity without connection is its own particular torture. If they had been gone, you could have longed for their return. If they had been cruel, you could have protected yourself with anger. But they were simply absent while present. Checked out while checked in. Going through the motions of parenthood without ever really showing up for the relationship it required. You learned early that presence and connection are not the same thing. This was perhaps one of the most important and painful lessons of your childhood, though you didn't have words for it then. You learned it in dozens of small moments that accumulated into a larger understanding. You learned it when you came home excited about something and your enthusiasm was met with a distracted nod. You learned it when you were upset about a friend's betrayal or a teacher's criticism, and your tears were dismissed as oversensitivity or drama. You learned it when you tried to share your interests, a book you loved, a drawing you'd made, a song you couldn't stop listening to, and those offerings were received with polite disinterest, as if you were a stranger making small talk rather than a child trying to be known by your own parents. A parent can sit across the dinner table and never truly see you. They can look in your direction, can make eye contact, can even ask you questions, and still not see you. Not the real you, the complicated inner person with hopes and fears and dreams and struggles. They see a child-shaped figure that needs to be fed and clothed and sent to bed at a reasonable hour. They see a responsibility, a dependent, a role they're obligated to fill. But they don't see the specific, unique person you are. They don't see the way you light up when you talk about certain things. They don't notice when you're struggling, when your usual spark has dimmed, when something is troubling you beneath the surface. They're looking at you, but they're not really seeing you. And children know the difference. Children can feel the difference between being observed and being truly witnessed, between being monitored and being understood. You learn to stop expecting them to notice things. You stopped waiting for your mother to realize you deep and unusually quiet for days or for your father to pick up on the fact that you were anxious about something. You learned that if you needed help, you'd have to explicitly ask for it, and even then, the help might be given grudgingly or with impatience, as if your need were an imposition. So you learned to need less. You learned to solve your own problems, to comfort yourself when you were sad, to figure out complicated homework on your own, to navigate the social complexities of school without guidance. You became self-sufficient not because it was developmentally appropriate but because it was the only option available to you. And everyone praised you for it. Such an independent child, they'd say. So mature for your age. They didn't realize that independence, in your case, wasn't a strength you developed naturally. It was a survival strategy you'd adopted out of necessity. They can live in the same house for 18 years and never know the child sleeping down the hall. This is perhaps the saddest truth of emotional abandonment. Your parents could have listed facts about you, your favorite color, your allergies, your bedtime, your school schedule. They knew the logistics of your life. But they didn't know you. They didn't know what made you feel safe or what kept you awake at night. They didn't know your deepest insecurities or your most cherished dreams. They didn't know the things you worried about or the questions you were afraid to ask. They didn't know what subjects made you feel alive with curiosity or what activities made you feel most yourself. You were a stranger to them, someone they lived with but never really encountered, never really explored, never really sought to understand. And perhaps most painfully, you couldn't understand why. You looked at yourself in the mirror and wondered what was wrong with you, what deficiency made you unworthy of their attention and curiosity. You watched them show more enthusiasm for a television program than they ever showed for your accomplishments. You noticed they could talk for hours with neighbors or friends about trivial matters but could then sustain a 10-minute conversation with you about something meaningful. And you internalized this as evidence of your own inadequacy rather than as evidence of their limitations. Children always blame themselves first. It's developmentally protective to believe your parents are good and you are the problem, because if your parents are flawed or incapable, then your survival is at risk. So you twisted yourself into knots trying to figure out what you could do differently, how you could be more interesting, more worthy, more deserving of their focus. This emptiness has a weight to it, a particular kind of loneliness that follows you into adulthood. It settles in your chest like a stone, cold and heavy, present even in moments that should be full of joy or connection. You carry it with you into friendships, into romantic relationships, into your own attempts at family. It shapes the way you move through the world, the way you relate to others, the way you understand your own worth. This loneliness has texture and temperature. It feels like sitting in a crowded room and feeling invisible. It feels like achieving something significant and having no one to call who would truly celebrate with you. It feels like needing comfort during a crisis and automatically assuming you handle it alone because that's what you learned to do. Because how do you grieve someone who never left? This question haunts adults who grew up with emotionally absent parents. Your parents are often still alive, still in your life in some capacity, still showing up to holidays and birthdays and family gatherings. They still call occasionally, still ask surface-level questions about your life, still play the role of parent in the most technical sense. But the parent you needed, the one who would have truly seen you, known you, delighted in you, that parent never existed. And you can't grieve someone who never was. You can't hold a funeral for a relationship that was never there. You can't mark an ending when there was never really a beginning. How do you name a loss when everyone tells you that you had everything you needed? Your parents provided for you materially. You had a home, food on the table, clothes to wear, money for school supplies and activities. You weren't physically abused or obviously neglected. From the outside, your childhood looked fine, maybe even privileged. And so when you tried to articulate what was missing, you struggled to find language that doesn't sound trivial or petty. The loss of that, the loss of being genuinely met by your own parents, is real. It's profound. And it shaped everything that came after.